60 years before it came crashing to an absolute halt. Again, signaling to some extent that there is a longevity to these kinds of institutions that doesn't depend necessarily on the continuation of that global role. Nonetheless, many argue that while the decline of American power has been soft, it is nonetheless inevitable that sooner or later the United States become replaced as a global hegemon, and that this may usher in a new period of conflict. To understand to some extent why hegemonic systems don't break down that easily, it might be worth it just briefly to mention where that concept of hegemony came from. And that is from an Italian communist who was arrested under Mussolini and thrown in jail. And while in jail, wrote what became known as the prison notebooks, which apparently were authored on toilet paper and smuggled out of the prison and later published. But what Antonio Gramsci was grappling with was the basic idea that as weak as capitalism appeared in Italy during the revolutionary period after the First World War, and as strong as the communist organizations trying to overthrow that state were, ultimately the state survived. Capitalism survived. And he argued that the reason for that is that what had been created in Italy, what had been created in capitalist countries around Western Europe, was a hegemonic system. A hegemonic system by which he meant not one that rested on naked coercion for its stability, but one in which even those that were oppressed by it, internalized to a greater or lesser extent the basic assumptions that made that system function. And thus, even in the absence of clear political control, there was more to creating a revolution, to breaking that system, than simply taking political power. And international relations experts have argued essentially that the same thing is true in an international system. The hegemonic system does not rest solely and exclusively on the hard power monopoly exercised by Great Britain during the 19th century or the United States in the 20th century. It rests to a considerable extent on other forms of power. Among those other forms of power are economic power, which at least one international relations expert is defined as stinky power, meaning that economic power is a little bit like a spider's web, in that people get drawn into it, and once they're drawn into a trade relationship, they're kind of stuck there. Sort of the same basic perception that liberals have with regard to free trade and how it ties states together. Economic power or economic systems, once a particular region of the world is integrated into that economic system, are hard for them to pull out. And for that reason, those economic systems will have a longer life than the state that initially created them. The second component of that is soft power. Soft power. The United States might have declined in economic terms relative to its international competitors, but in soft power terms, it is still very much a dominant player. And by soft power, we mean things like the attractiveness of American culture. And the main purveyors of soft power that continue to put the United States in a pretty positive position internationally are things like the entertainment media, Hollywood, and the extent to which that influences the perceptions of the United States and of U.S. government globally. These kinds of things decline much more slowly. And while China, for example, may be gaining economic power tremendously, it is not in a position to assume a hegemonic position. Largely because on the one hand, it still lacks the hard power component of U.S. dominance, at least for the time being, although that may change. but also very notably because the Chinese model isn't really all that attractive to anyone other than Justin Trudeau. He probably misspoke when he said that he admired the Chinese more than anyone else, but didn't give that a heck of a lot of thought. But the reality is that Chinese authoritarianism is still not particularly appealing to most of us around the world. As such, the Chinese face some pretty substantial stumbling blocks in eclipsing the kind of attractiveness of the Western model of development that is typified by the United States. And indeed, many have argued that a crucial component to the defeat of the Soviet Union in the Cold War had a great deal to do with the appeal of soft power, not to mention that economic sticky power, meaning that certain cultural assets of the United States were crucial in undermining the appeal of the Soviet government and the Soviet model. If people visited in the 1980s, I have a number of friends that visited the Soviet Union, that spent long periods of time doing research in the Soviet Union, and generally they were advised, don't bring too much money. Money is relatively useless. Most things are cheap in the Soviet Union. If you're going to bring anything that's going to do you any good, money shouldn't be the thing. Anyone want to take a guess what the most important thing was for them to bring?
Cigarettes?
Cigarettes, not so much, but yes, cigarettes were among them, yeah. Levi's jeans, that's right. Levi's jeans were worth their weight in gold in the Soviet Union. It's not like they didn't have pants in the Soviet Union, but for whatever reason, Levi's kind of trumped it all. And that goes to some extent toward explaining the importance of soft power in maintaining this overall system. I gather from your restlessness that we continue at this point. So I can't quite see the time, but I said that I've overstayed my welcome. Once again, I apologize for that. And we will see you all next week. You can take a look at Portal tomorrow.